Hello guys. Now we are going to study about comparative politics from paper 2 of PSIR optional. So first, we will see the PYQs and what is asked in the PYQs. So as you can see, difficulties faced by political theorists in comparing states, then limitations of comparative method, then limitation of comparative political analysis. So first thing, limitations or difficulties is asked of comparative politics. Okay. Then second thing they asked is about the significance. See here, in 2019, they asked about the significance of comparative politics, and they also asked about its limitations. So limitations is asked more than 3 to 4 times. Okay. Then after significance, you can see its changing nature of comparative politics is asked. Okay, changing nature or its scope. Okay, so it includes all that. And the most heavily asked thing is this approaches to comparative politics, which includes political economy approach, Marxist approach, okay, then political sociology approach, then these two new approaches, which you can see, not new actually, but these two are modern approaches to comparative politics. Okay. After this, first we will see mostly from my notes, and these notes are made in a form of answer writing format. Okay. So first we will learn what is comparative politics. Okay. Yes. So comparative politics is basically the study of political phenomena and compare them across different geographies. Okay. Here we not only study the political governments. Okay. Wait. We not only study the political governments. We also study the political structures. Okay. We also study the nature of politics in the country. Okay. This nature of politics includes study of pressure groups. Okay. Role of pressure groups, NGOs, etc. Okay. After this, so now you have understood what comparative politics is in short. Okay. You can also use this definition, okay, by John Bondell. As you can read, okay. So where did or when did comparative politics start? Firstly, most importantly, it started. It was started by Aristotle. Okay, he is the father, regarded as the father of comparative politics. Okay, he analyzed more than 150 constitutions, and also you can consider Plato, who started or who first compared Sparta and Athens. Okay, for he did not he compared Sparta's democracy, sorry, Athens' democracy to Sparta's military rule. Okay, then as you can see, comparative politics is centered around different methods of comparison of domestic politics, political institutions, and conflict between them. So as you can see, I've introduced a bit to comparative politics. You can use few of these points as a form of introduction to the question, or else if you have any new points which you can add, you can tell me. Okay. So after this, now we will read about the features of comparative politics. Okay. So about the features or nature of comparative politics. Okay. Feature or nature is basically the same. So first is its analytical and empirical research. Okay. So comparative politics most probably does not rely on normative aspects. Okay. What does normative aspect mean? Which means what ought should one do? Like Socrates used to say. So it does not focus on what should the government do. Okay. It rather focuses on what the government is doing. Okay. And what the government is studying. It also studies the political behavior, processes, and the systematic performance across different nations using data. The most important thing here is use of data. Okay, it rejects normative methods, as you can see. That is why it is value free. Okay, now let's analyze. Sorry. So now one of the other features of comparative politics is shift from institutional studies to behavioral studies. Okay, so comparative politics shifted from study of institutions, laws to behavioral science or behavioral action. Okay, after that, another feature is its interdisciplinary focus, which focuses on different disciplines such as anthropology, sociology, psychology are also inculcated in political science. Okay, so here I will give two value additions to you if you want to add. One first is Gabriel Almond's structural functionalism, which focuses on the structure and function of the a political organization. Okay, and the other is David Easton's input-output model, which focuses on the process and flow of politics. His model is basically an environment, or you can say a feedback loop type model. Okay, another feature is the changing nature of how comparative politics shifted its focus from developed nations to developing nations, which means they focus now on post-colonial states like Africa, Latin America, etc. Another main feature is its generalizations and theory building, that which tells us that comparative politics and its theories are open for falsification, which lead to generalization and theories. Okay. So now let's learn about the scope of comparative politics. So the scope of comparative politics is expanding. Okay, so it was first Eurocentric, then it changed to globalism, and now its is on post-colonial states. Also, it focuses or studies formal and informal political structures, like government machinery is a formal political structure which includes executive, judiciary, legislature, etc. And how informal political structures affect government machinery is also shown through comparative studies. And the role, for example, in India, the role of caste, religion, deep state, etc., and how it influences the government machinery is also shown through comparative politics. Now, the second, it also studies about political infrastructure and processes. So here, and it also helps channel. It also acts as an important channel between the citizens and the government. Okay, so citizens can compare, for example, electoral system, which is first past the post versus a proportional representation system. Okay, the second, the another vital part of the scope of comparative politics is dynamics of political change. It studies how political systems evolve and decay. Example is, for example, how Afghanistan, which was first democratic in nature, decade and now has turned into a military-based system. Okay, so after that, it also focuses on public policy and government governance outcomes, which basically means performance of how states perform, basically, which you can see through multiple indexes such as the multidimensional poverty index, the Gini coefficient or inequality index, and many other like HDI index, okay, human development index, and many other such indices, which and which are an anchor for governance outcomes and performance measurement. So now let's study about the evolution of the comparative politics of how Aristotle started it. First, he gave six forms of government, as you can see here. Okay, so and he classified them into two forms. One is normal and another is perverted or diluted form. So you can see if there is a single ruler, you can see monarchy for normal and tyranny. For few, there is aristocracy and oligarchy, and for many, there is the best is polity, and the perverted form is democracy. Machiavelli also forms a part of comparative analysis of government institutions, as he supported republicanism for the people who are well behaved or well mannered and not in the state of nature, whereas people who are in the state of nature are were to be ruled by a monarch. Now let's now after Machiavelli, normative approach was also added to the comparative studies of government institutions, and it was led by liberalism. So basically, of how a government should be. Like for example, you can also see in Bentham or J.S. Mill or Locke of how you can see the normative aspects of how government should be. Okay, but they are not truly comparative in nature. Okay, and why they are not comparative in nature is because these normative approach these normative approaches toward a comparison of governments ignored the political norms in the colonial countries. Okay, for example, they were in support of voting rights. Okay, in their respective states, but not in the colonies. Okay, now after World War II, a shift was seen from traditional approach to modern approach, which due to the bipolar world between capitalists and communists. Okay, post World War II, state was replaced by systems. Okay, which led to the system approaches to comparative politics. The shift was to the shift was mainly focused towards Western liberal democracy model because Fukuyama said that a liberalism has won the debate or has won the battle of ideologies, and thus this led to intensification of the study of comparative politics. Okay, I might have missed many points in evolution, but I prefer that you study from your notes because I don't think it is much of a significant in answer writing. Now, after this, we will study about the traditional approach. Okay, but before that, no, we can do limitations later. So, okay, wait. So now let's learn about the traditional approach. So there are basically four branches in traditional approach. Okay, so first one, which we are going to study, is the philosophical approach. Okay, yes. So please don't hang. Hmm. So the first main thing about the philosophical approach is is that logic was used to establish true nature of ideal state. Okay, as you can see, this is also normative in nature. Okay, that is why traditional approach was later replaced by modern approach. Okay, and and it looked at the most favorable political systems which lead to the development of humans. The main focus was the development of humans here. Okay, and then the the few criticisms about it was that it was it had limited practical significance. Okay, you can see the example of Plato's Republic. Okay, or Marxism. Okay, I mean communism. Sorry, not Marxism. Then it was ethnocentric in nature. These are very basic. This one is very basic. You can write or don't write. Okay. Then now, oh sorry, one more important point is that in the philosophical approach, okay, philosophical reflections on universal political values were seen. Okay. So after this, now the second approach is the historical approach. Okay. So about the historical approach, any political theory or any political event was understood only through the lens of history. Okay. So in short, it became very narrow-minded, only stuck to history, and nothing else was used. So any political theory or event understood from the lens of history only. Hmm. Then after this, and also many political thinkers, like for example Machiavelli. You can write Machiavelli here. Okay, he also highlighted the significance of studying history to understand politics. This was told in his book to Prince, or it was addressed to Prince to study history to understand political events from the lens of history. Then one more thinker, Sabine and Dunning, two more, sorry. So they both focused on studying of history to understand study of history to understand political phenomena. But historical approach was criticized for being biased. Okay, for example, Alan Alan Ball criticized it not for being comprehensive. You can also write a criticism from a post-colonial perspective that colonial masters manipulated history to undermine the real history of the colonial states. For example, India. After this, now we have the third approach, which is the institutional approach. Okay. Now let's focus upon the institutional approach of comparative politics. All these approaches I'm writing here are a subset of the traditional approach. Okay. So institutional approach, as you know, I have also told. Okay, that is study of formal institutions. such as government, okay, and many other like judiciary, etc. But it was so now there are a few criticism. Okay, so I'll let you think. It had a very institutional approach, had a very narrow focus without individual consideration. For example, in a totalitarian regime, there is basically no formal institution. I mean, there is a formal institution, but the formal institution is the monarch or who is the ruler. So that individual consideration was not focused upon in the institutional approach. Rather, they would study how the totalitarian regime used to work in the institutional approach. And here, they also did not consider the behavioral actions of the individual. That is why it was criticized. Okay. The next criticism is it separates the contribution of leadership and only compares system. Okay, compares systems. Roy Macready's called it called this approach non-comparative, static, biased, parochial. You can write it in criticism. Okay. Then now let's learn about the legal approach. So legal approach. So in legal approach, state was considered as the creator and enforcer of law. Okay, and as you can see, there was no adherence to other structures such as the sociological structure where pressure groups or where citizens force the government to make a law. For example, another is there was no like political structures involvement in creating law. For example, the minor or informal political structures like pressure groups. Okay, that is why. Then next, you can also link here Hobbes. Okay, who said law as the command from sovereign. You can use this as an intro if a standalone question is asked on the legal approach. Okay, so a few criticisms have been laid against legal approach. Okay, so one of them is it is narrow, as always. You can see in above one as well. Leads to only one aspect of life and not covers. Okay, so it does not cover entire behavior of political action. Only law is considered, not how it is created. What was the process to create it? Okay, that all was not considered, and there was also no guarantee that strong laws would be implemented properly. Okay, so basically, these four are the uh, subsets of the traditional approach. Okay, now we will see a basic, or I would say, a general criticism of the traditional approach. Okay, I mean, if you forgot the points from the above approach, I will just give one small general framework on the approaches of the traditional approach, which you can apply to criticize all the four. Okay, first I will give you a framework. Okay, framework for what features? First one, I'll give you a framework for features. You can apply in all the four above approaches, same features. Okay. First, normative in nature. Okay. What ought to be or value driven. Then, second one, you can write value laden. Okay. Third, descriptive in nature. Fourth, limited to formal structures of government. Okay. You can use the same points to criticize this approach. Okay. Now let's see a few general criticisms of this approach. Hmm. So first is the role of individuals. This approach failed to identify the role of the individuals in shaping the political structures and the sociological structures, especially the formal ones, and also the role of informal ones. Okay. Then the next criticism is biasness and lack of regularity. The next one is excessive focus on institutions and constitutions. Okay. For example, you can also apply this in law approach. Okay. In this, you can also apply this in the law approach. Okay, where you can criticize it for excessive focus only on the creation and only on the creation and enforcing enforcement of law, not on the implementation side of it, and lack of scientific characteristics. What does it mean? Basically, they were not open for falsification. Okay, so they were basically like written on stone. You cannot change. Basically, like that of that type. So they were not open for falsification, and they could not be generalized into theories. So that is why also they were criticized heavily. Okay.